Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome to our podcast.
So the topic for today is the objection to God or to different religions where somebody will say, why is faith necessary, or why does God demand faith? In other words, why can't we know everything we need to know about God just through seeing, or just through demonstrable evidence, as opposed to faith is an essential element in Christianity and Islam. So why would he require that? Why wouldn't he make it more obvious and just show himself in the sky, or write it in the sky, or something like that? So that's kind of the question which we'll dig into. So what are your initial thoughts on that?
I think we also have to mention about faith, right? Is that there was less emphasis on scientific knowledge and faith. Is there mainly objection? It's there's no scientific knowledge that could support faith and why we should have faith, right? If we follow the idea of there's no observable evidence and that God did not make himself obvious, I think that's very surface level thinking, because he did show himself, right? He, in many ways, be it in Christianity through the view that Jesus came down to earth, or through Muhammad, and how a lot of things in the Quran that speak about scientific knowledge that we barely just touched upon now. I think that's I don't know what kind of other evidence you would want, when there's it's the best evidence. And if you don't want to believe in history, right, you just want to ignore all of that and say this is a coincidence, or this, Jesus wasn't even real, or which, by the way, historians have agreed, that Jesus was a real person.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to agree to that, you would still have to understand that we, the air that we're breathing, science itself, right? The existence of science is just a law, right? It's just a formation of a law. And what we do in science is just observe this law and apply it, right? We aren't really actually making anything or changing anything in the world. We're just applying the knowledge of the laws of the world, right? So that law must be made by a lawmaker. Someone has to make the law. Law can't just, come out of nowhere. There has to be a structure, and especially for it to be so precise. There's equations for everything, be it for falling from a bridge or whatever, throwing something. There's specific numbers that you could follow, and that's why they say math is the secret language of the world, of the universe. It's because it's very specific. There's specific numbers, and for it to happen by coincidence is very illogical. The chance of it happening is impossible, yet it's still there, right? I think that's the biggest way to look at it, that the existence of science is proof of God, and it doesn't go against God.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of presumptions or assumptions in the question, because yes, like you said, people of faith like Christianity and Islam do look actually at, you're saying, scientific knowledge as evidence of a God, a ordered world that makes sense. But also, I think there's something else I think about is the idea that God himself isn't observable in as direct a way. God is the creator. He is outside of creation. He created it. And the Bible, and I think Islam is similar in this, says very clearly that all creation is speaking about God. It is communication. Creation is communication. It's not just, you can't disconnect it from the creator, but also just the basic idea that the creator's outside of his creation.
Right.
So it's not, and obviously, like you mentioned, in Christianity, he steps into the creation in the form of Jesus, and he interacts with the creation. But already there's this assumption of people expect that God should be dwell within his creation in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense.
One other thing is in the Quran exactly about, you know, everything communicates, you know, speaks to God. There is an exact verse that says everything prays to God.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything, even inanimate objects pray to God. Everything prays to God and speak of His glory, right?
Yeah.
So that's like one of the things, and I think one of examples that I always had of like, you know, God being outside of His creation. It's like if a carpenter, someone that makes furniture, makes a door, right? When he puts up the door, right, he's not going to follow the rules that he made for the door, right? The door won't ever be able to understand its creator, right? It's just not able to. It doesn't have that capacity to be able to do that. And God can make everything. He like, it's impossible to answer, but He might be able, you know, to make us, you know, the ability to observe Him, but He didn't. And that's like how it is, and that's, you know, how it always was, right? So, you know, the laws that were created, you know, they were on us, right? They are like restrictions on us, and not in a bad way. Not maybe like if we see anything related to God more directly, it would cause us more harm than good. I think that's like one of the important things, which I don't know if it's in the Bible. I do remember there's like an inkling of it, but in the Quran, where Moses where the Jewish people ask Moses, we want to see God, right? So Moses goes to God to like a mountain range, right? And he asks God to see him. So God in the Quran, it says God tells him, look at that mountain. So the mountain didn't like see God, but God, you know, sent His like showed His divine power to the mountain. If the mountain doesn't crumble, then you can see me, right? And so Moses looks at the mountain, and he sees the mountain crumbling to dust. It turns directly to dust. And so Moses falls down, and he loses consciousness because of that. And he asks for forgiveness for asking, you know, such a claim to see God. Because like a mountain, however big it is and however huge, it wasn't able to even perceive the glory of God. Yeah. Not God Himself, just the glory of God. I think there is a similar story.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same, but very similar. Like an idea that like Moses goes to the top of the mountain and looking to like meet with God, and like the Israelites who stay at the bottom, they just see like, I think the clouds descend on the mountain, and it's just like a storm, and they think like Moses certainly died in there. And it's like Moses in the Bible story, it talks about how Moses just saw the glory of God. Like he just saw the back of God, basically. He says, not that like there's a full physical manifestation of everything who God is, but like he just saw a glimpse of that glory.
I think,
and it was his face was glowing for days after. Right. So it's the idea that like he couldn't even actually a human could not actually take in the full glory of God.
I think this is like a adjacent topic, but I think like in my, you know, head, the way I could explain that, you know, seeing, you know, the back of God, I think it could also mean seeing like the back of us, right, is not a representative of, you know, the front. Yeah. So I think that also it could be like he just saw part or like a small reflection, not physically actually the back of God, right? Just like a small reflection of His divine glory.
Yeah.
Which could be like, it's similar to how, you know, when he saw the divine glory of God on the mountain, how it's exactly, you know, the same if you know, interpret it in a different way.
Yeah.
I think it's very similar.
Yeah, and so I would say, like, so as we've kind of covered, so there's different things that both Christian and Islam would say, like God created us with a conscience to know, like we both believe that He put His law in our hearts. We both believe that creation declares about God and points to Him and communicates about Him. But still, I think we would run into the next step of, like, the question that somebody might form is like, if God wants to be known, why? Like, I think I've heard atheist or agnostic kind of phrase it like this, like, why doesn't he just like show me directly? Why is faith the like essential, the key? And I think the question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, why is faith a valid form of knowledge? because I think it ultimately comes down to that. We have to understand more about faith, what it is, how valid a form of knowing something it is, to understand, like, why that's essential.
So for the first part, where it's like, why doesn't God make himself more obvious? I think he made himself obvious enough for our brains to understand, right? Mm-hmm. Logically, for our brains to lead to him. Mm-hmm. That's very obvious. There's an obvious hunger in us, mm-hmm. a spiritual hunger where we want, we want to have a God, right? And that was noticed throughout history, right? And so our mind, craves for a God. Logically, we have came to the idea that there is God, right? But if God shows himself like directly, we have lost our capacity, the greatest thing that God gave us, which is our mind, our logic, right? Which is very emphasized in the Quran, right? Where God calls humans multiple times those who have brains, right? It's like one of the features, the most important features of humans, right, is our mind and our brain, which make us different from everything else, right? So he gave us a tool, right, which is our mind, where we can understand him and find him, right? Then it's like a test. We're living through a test right now, right? And he gave us the tools to pass the test. It's not that hard to pass the test if you use your tools correctly, right? But he's not going to give you the answer directly, because that loses the whole point of the test, right? And I think we could cover in later topics, why would God make a test in the beginning? Why would he want to test us? What's the point of life, and what's the point of creation as a whole? I think that's a bigger topic that we should cover. Yeah. And about faith being a valid form of knowledge. I mean, faith is not just about religion. Yes. We've discussed that before. Faith isn't just about religion. Right. It's pretty much you believing in something so intensely that you have like a strong opinion about it. That itself could be faith, Believing in an ideology, that is faith, right? And faith, in my view of it, at least, not Islamic view, but as my view of it, it follows a chain of logic that, it just goes by. And then at some point, right, it goes to understanding this logic and applying it, right? And that's how you have faith in something. The example could be like in an exam, right? And you have all this knowledge, but the question that they give you haven't seen before, right? The question you haven't applied it before. So you use all this knowledge to put an answer and have faith in your answer, right? And I think that's important here, where it's like we have this logical chain of thought that God is real through all of this. The last step is having faith in having confidence and faith in our own answer, right? Because and that's also similar to, other beliefs, where it's like, you believe in this thing, you believe in that thing, right? Be it political, be it any kind of sort of belief, right? And once you believe in like certain things that you believe are certainly true, you reach a point where you have to use faith and have to apply faith to completely believe in the topic. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think like it's maybe a misconception or like a misunderstanding to think that the world ought to be in a way that everything that is true or exists or is real is like physically observable in the way that scientific knowledge is, because it's the whole idea of metaphysics. Metaphysics means beyond, after physical. And it's like, if there's spiritual realities, if there's other dimensions of reality and truth in the world that goes beyond, and we can engage in that, like you said, through logic, through reason, and actually have like knowledge as opposed to just like kind of wandering in the dark. But it's not going to be physically observable in the same way. And I think to your point about faith not just being a religious thing, I think this is a very important piece of, in my understanding of like why faith is a valid form of knowledge. Because if you look at human lives and human existence, it's actually impossible to, even though we like to think that we are very like, we only operate off of observation and just knowledge that is clearly demonstrable to us. We, every single day, every person goes through their life using faith, like little f faith in small things at every level. So I've heard people talk about the example of like, you
every time you go through an intersection at a green light, like you're not stopping every time to check and make sure that the other cars are obeying their red light.
Exactly, yeah.
It's just you're operating on the principle of, I know that that's gonna happen.
There's faith in it, yeah.
Yeah, or when you turn, I mean, maybe these aren't the best examples,
No,
but when you turn the light switch on, you're not seeing all the operations at work that get the electricity that make the light turn on, but you just know that's how it works. The point being, there's still, there's like a kind of implicit sort of trust in things that we don't see everything that is, you actually could not operate as a human in day-to-day life without operating on the basis of faith.
True.
And it's not detached from like knowledge or reason, but it is itself a natural part. I think God created us with both the physical senses and the physical capacity to observe things and know through that way, and also with the capacity to know by like just the tool or the medium of faith. And I think that applies to spiritual things.
Faith could also be very related to experience our own lives, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's why a lot of, you would find an ideology, right? And a lot of people would have faith in it. But each single person has a different kind of faith in that same ideology, right? Mm-hmm. Their view of the whole topic, even if they read the exact same text, right, they would have complete different faith operation and faith belief in that thing, right? And I think that's really important because our experiences, right, it results in the way we understand faith and how we operate upon it, right? I mean, when you first start driving, you probably are going to like check if the car is going to hit you at the intersection like every second, right? But slowly you because of experience, you already put all your faith into the other person and all the cars around you. And I think that's one of the important things where as we live through life, right, we see the good things that God gave us. And maybe at first we're not full of faith, which is like we start as kids, we're not full of faith. But as we grow and we see all the good things that God gave us, right, slowly our faith increases because of experience. And we have more and more faith. And that's why you would see older people have probably the strongest faith in God because they experience the most stuff. And maybe younger people who experience more, stuff. And it doesn't need to be like good things. A lot of bad things could give you more faith, in a subject or in a topic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it's interesting too because that gets into like faith is, I think there's two ways that can even be taken of like faith as in like, I don't know, like assenting to some truth that like you're kind of believing in that without seeing it or whatever. But faith also has like the relational sense, the relational dynamic of trusting in like a child having faith in his father or something. There's like a relational trust sense. And I think that's with God, it's not just like our faith isn't purely just like assenting to this truth as reality, but it's like an interpersonal trusting God as a being, as a as a creator, as a father in Christianity. So I think that's important to note too.
Right. I think the next problem we move on to is the unresistant unbeliever. So someone that would say they do want it to be true, right? But don't believe it is, right? They do like the idea, of God, but they don't, they don't believe it because in their, observations of the physical world, they don't see, God. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think this is, this is very interesting because I know there's several atheists, like influencers, who have presented this argument. Like I think Alex O'Connor maybe sort of falls into this category a little bit. Where it's, and I would say I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that one of the misconceptions about this argument, why it doesn't make sense, is a misunderstanding of what faith actually looks like in the life of somebody who does have faith or who believes. Because there's an idea of like, well, I like it, I want it to be true, I think it's good, but I just don't currently believe it. And so then they'll basically frame it like, if God wants to be known, how can there be this category of me who wants to know him? But like, I just need him to. So basically, what it does is they make the argument by saying, I'm in the passive state of, I will believe when when my eyes are open, when I'm made to believe.
Right.
But that kind of puts the ball almost in God's courts of like, well, why aren't you? Right. Why don't you make me believe? Just if you want to be like, make me believe. Yeah. And this is the thing I would say is, one, as we talked about, he already is, the creation already is, your heart, your conscience already is screaming to you about the truth.
And that's why you want, for it to be real.
But, and two, it's like, as a Christian, as somebody who has faith, I still have to basically make that active decision. It's the step of faith to believe in something you don't see. It's not some like magical experience where you're like, yes, I am convinced of it. I am sure, I do have a confidence in it. But the nature of my faith isn't such that like this kind of external thing just takes me over passively, and I'm just like, I believe it like in the same way that I see this table in front of me. I think it makes sense. I think it's logical and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, I still have to take the step of faith and say, you know what? I don't see it, but I am going to believe. I am going to put my trust in it. And so I don't think it makes sense to put yourself in the passive category of being like, well, I'm ready to believe. But if you want to believe, you have to take the step of belief.
Right. I think that's also important. Like God, the relationship between us and God, right, from our side, is very much like, just a lot of people, it's just blindless trust, right? Even with logic and everything, like they say, you don't have direct observable, which I disagree with, but they say you don't have direct observable evidence of God, right? But I definitely disagree with that. Yeah. But that's also one of the things where you have like a certain degree of where like this logic makes sense to me, right? I still might not see it, in the final step, but I'll still have this mindless trust because all the logic follows, right? But I think it's also important once you step into that, into that category of, trust with God, that's when you actually start having a stronger faith. Like when you first start out, you don't have as much faith as you think you do, even with all your belief. But the more you trust God, the more your belief grows and your faith grows, and that's also like really important. Where it's like, you want it, but you're like, I don't have that faith in you, because faith isn't some like instant value that goes from 0 to 100. Yeah, it's something that grows slowly with you.
Yeah, that or were you gonna?
No,
but that reminds me of there's a verse in the Bible where Jesus is like walking through a crowd, and somebody like comes to him asking him to heal them, or can't remember the exact scenario, but basically the guy cries out to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. And that's sometimes faith is at that point where it's like, I believe even in spite of like my unbelief, like basically help me, like the crying out of in the prayer of like, give me faith, give me belief. But even that is an act of belief.
Right.
That is
I think there's something that is really important too, the strength of belief, right? What does faith and what can you get from faith in a lot of ways, right? A nice story that I remember, which I don't have the sources for, but I have heard it from one of the known sheikhs in Shia Islam. The story is one of the big heads like in Shia religion had a student who would come from very far places, right? And he was always late. He was the best student, but he was always late, right? So he's like, why are you always late? He's like, there's a river, right, that I need to wait for like small boat to come and help me pass through it. So I have to wait for this time until I can pass through. So the Shia, the religious figure, wrote him something on a small paper and gave it to him. He's like, take this paper and And when you go home now, tomorrow, walk on the water and just hold it in your hand. And don't open it. Once you open it, you're not going to be able to do that. So he goes and he does that. The next day, he walks on water, right? And he goes and he's like surprised, like, what's happened? For 3 days, he does that. Sure. And obviously, curiosity, like, what is in this paper, right? He opens it, and the only thing in it is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful. So it was just his faith, right, in his teacher, right, that this is going to actually happen if I follow my teacher, right? This blindless faith that he had, right, resulted in him able to do, a miracle of walking on water, right? Which is, I think that's like the biggest thing about faith, right? Once you have that strong faith, you can do a lot of stuff. And this is, of course, like in this story, he just has faith in his teacher. It's not God that he has faith in, right? Now imagine if you have faith in God, what you can do. And I think it's like applied to our, life directly, be it in studies and, social interactions. If you want to be successful in life in general, right? The more faith you have in God, the more successful you get. And I think a lot of people that, on their journey, to faith and to stronger faith, they realize that the closer they are to God, right? And a lot of people take, praying or reading the Bible or the Quran as a waste of time where they could be studying or doing something else, right? But in actuality, this small part of your life that you're spending with God, right? This is going to help you tremendously in all your stages of life. It's just like a small step, right? That leads you to bigger things. Because imagine the one who's supporting you is the creator. Everything follows his orders, right? Like, it's like you have the best backing in the world, right? You have the best connections in the world.
And I think too, like, it's important to clarify that, at least what I believe, like, I agree with that to the extent of, like, yes, having the faith and knowing God is the greatest good you can have, and that, like, you will experience, like, blessing from that. Doesn't mean that necessarily, like, I don't think that always translates to being materially prosperous or things going well, like everything, like some of the people who were close with God and they had
definitely. I also think
disasters.
I also think that, when you trust someone, right? You trust that even the bad things that happen are for a good cause, right? So while I do say you're going to be successful in everything, right?
Yes.
There is, like, sometimes the thing that you see as bad, right? And this is a direct quote, a verse from the Quran, which just says, what you think is good for you might be bad, and what's bad for you might be good, right? It's like it's like a verse in the Quran. So, like, don't think that because you failed in this point, right? That means, God just left you, for yourself, and all the faith that you put into God, has all gone to waste.
Yeah, there's a very similar verse in the Bible. It's like when Joseph is sold into captivity by his blood. I think I actually mentioned that in the suffering, but he basically says what they meant for evil, God meant for good. And there's another one, like, all things work together for good for those who love God. And I think, too, the Bible makes it clear that suffering and, like, hardships will actually specifically grow our faith. Like, they will lead us to, like, we will have maybe less of things in the world, but more intimate relationship with God.
Okay, I was laughing. Let me just break the fourth wall here. I was laughing at him because we had to move rooms while we're recording this, and he stopped mid-sentence, and he was trying to complete the sentence so we don't need to edit it and everything, and he was like, more intimate relationship with God. Okay,
could not funny. Repeat the sentence.
Yeah, that was funny.
Well, now we've been exposed.
Yeah, I had to expose him.
Our mid-episode switch up.
It was too funny to not expose him. So what we wanted to, like, end the episode covering is the fact that some people that would ask, having, like, if God just put a message in the sky, right, and just revealed it to everyone that, that there is God and everything, and just made it clear, why wouldn't God do that? And what, me and Peter have discussed previously, that these people, the same people that want that evidence, even when they do see it, they're not going to believe. It's like hard-coded into them that they're not going to believe whatever they're going to see. No matter the evidence that is presented to them, they're not going to believe. I think you said there's like a verse in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, I think in both Bible and sounds like in the Quran, it talks about how, like, this scenario is actually addressed when, like, Jesus said, if I already sent the prophets, I already, like, performed all these miracles, and still people don't believe. Like, Jesus himself came, and people were not believing. And I think, basically, we think that we are unbiased, and if we were to experience that or to see that, like, we would just accept. But I think that people who frame it like that will miss the point that sometimes it's not the lack of evidence is not the missing piece. It's not the evidence that's the missing piece. It's the willingness to accept it. And when somebody doesn't want to believe something or is unwilling, they will, like, reinterpret anything they see. So I think that's...
And I think there's also, like, some people, even though they technically believe in it, they are also, like, they want something else, They want... I think this is, like, the story for... when Moses crossed the Red Sea. This is mostly in Islamic religion, where when Moses and the Jews crossed the Red Sea right after, he split it in half, and right, like 30 feet after they passed the Red Sea, just 30 feet, they saw people idolizing, an idol that they had, and they were praying to it. And the Jews turned to Moses on like, why don't we have an idol to worship? And even though they just saw the miracle of God, which is like they still want something else, even though they have all the evidence needed to believe. They just have, ignored all this evidence and chose that, no, there's a need inside me that is irrelevant. It's more like, I think this is also what we discussed in the first or second episode, where it's like we're like part, animalistic needs, and then there's the divine nature within us. And that we try to feed the animalistic needs in us way too much, especially currently. We feed into that way too much, which makes us unwilling to believe and put our faith into that into the evidence that we are presented with.
Yeah, so I think like stories like that, and it's like similar stuff in the Bible, I think it shows a lot more about the human condition and the human heart than the evidence we're working with or what we've seen or experienced. Because constantly the Israelites in the Old Testament, God performed these great miracles that nobody could deny. It was supernatural divine power. And within months, weeks, years, those same people were denying it and reinterpreting that experience or questioning it. And I just think that it's the idea that there's not going to, like, take hell, for example. Some people will talk about, like, hell is going to be people who are like being externally, like, tormented or suffering, whatever, and they're going to be, like, crying out, like, they want to escape hell, they want to go be with God. But that's not actually the way I think that we see from, I guess, the Bible and just from logic, that there's not going to be anyone in hell who, if God came to them and gave them a second chance, would take that. It's like, definitely. It's a point of, if you reach a point of rejection, of closing yourself off to that, it doesn't matter how many more times you're offered, you don't see it as appealing.
Right. If I remember correctly, there's, exactly about that. There's, like, in the Quran, I'm not really sure about the exact phrasing of it, but in the Quran, there is a story where the people of heaven talk to the people of hell, people inside hell, right? They talk to them directly. It's like they look down and talk to people of hell, where the people in hell are, like, asking for, forgiveness. So the people in heaven are like, you were given all this evidence. You just chose to not believe. And it was exactly what you said. And even if you, like, were given another chance, you would do exactly the same thing, right? They were like, no, the evidence weren't strong enough, right? Exactly, the argument that's presented. But the people in heaven, they were like, then if the evidence wasn't strong enough, how are we here and you there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of it's one of the really enjoyable parts of the Quran. It's worded very beautifully in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
The whole story follows like like a very dialogue kind of base, which is usually different from how the Quran usually operates in a lot of other parts. We have like 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I guess, just C.S. Lewis has a very similar, he writes a book called The Great Divorce that's essentially on that same topic, people having a meeting with people in hell. And I think, just to reiterate that it's not going to be, hell is not going to be like this external torment and suffering to people who don't who are just trying to, it's actually internally imposed. It's internally imposed by cutting yourself off from the source of life, from rejecting God. And that is because of the internal state of hardness of heart, rejecting God. And that, whatever you present to that, kind of like a heart in that state, is going to reject or reinterpret. Or it's kind of like if somebody has their head buried in the sand and it's like, well, it doesn't matter what you would put in front of them, they're not going to see. And I'm not saying that everyone, I think there's people who are earnestly seeking. And that's why I would say, take that step of faith. Pray, ask God to reveal himself.
Right. I think that's really important. A step of faith doesn't have to be, like I mentioned before, instantly believe.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you ask God to reveal himself to you, he will reveal himself to you in different ways, in very special things. I think a lot of it was, in my family, right? It's really important for us because we, our financial situation wasn't, the best most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And every single time when something would happen, right, we somehow would get the necessary funds, for rent or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been like this for years. We would go completely bankrupt, no money at all, and suddenly we would get some new income source out of nowhere, right? That we completely ignored before. I think that's one of the things that strengthened our faith in God and just the ways He revealed Himself to. And it's the protectiveness of God to us was really important, especially as I grew up, which I think we tend to ignore a lot of facts, right? Or we tend to just ignore the evidence that are presented to us. But sometimes we need to sit down and just think about what we have. And there's a verse in the Quran where it says, "And the people that lay on their pillow at night and think about the wonders of the universe." Those people are knowledgeable. That's what it says. It says, and I think that's also where the Bible and the Quran pushed toward the idea of science, towards understanding, and which is why I always say that science and religion are not opposing. They were never opposing each other. They are one topic. I always see them as one topic. I'm in the science field, and all I learn is just something that feeds into my religion. I feel like science is just a branch of religion and not some other topic that's completely unrelated.
Yeah.
And I hope later on in other episodes we can talk about verses, maybe in the Bible and the Quran, about scientific things, right?
Yeah.
That were revealed in the Quran or the Bible that were clearly indicates of, other, a lot of stuff that we just realized, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really important to, go over too.
Yeah, and ultimately, like you said, there's the physical realm and the metaphysical, the spiritual realities, and there's overlap in what we see and how we understand them. But just because not everything metaphysically, not everything in metaphysics can be observed in the physical, doesn't mean there's not evidence for it. And I think to end.
His last point. His five last points.
Yeah. Now I want to save him more. No. Basically, just to reiterate a point you said earlier, a spiritual hunger implies a spiritual sustenance. In the same way, that's something that C.S. Lewis talks about. In the same way that there's, we have hunger. And there is actually food to meet that hunger in the real world. The things that we have a need for are indicative of things that are in reality
Right.
that meet that
Right.
need.
And we, because my major is neuroscience, so when Peter talks about that stuff, I think more deeply in the brain
Yeah.
and how like food, right? When you eat food, the brain produces dopamine, which is why we're so addicted to food. We are addicted to food. However much we think we're not. We are very addicted to food. And it's not just about that's why you see a lot of obese people, because we're addicted to food. Some people just go over the addiction and don't control it. But there I go off topic. But what I want to say
this is good. I want you to be the last. I want you to make the last point.
Yeah. So the last point is, there is a neuroscience in us, in our brain and how it's wired that asks for that. We obtain dopamine from religion. And there was a book that I read about the neuroscience and why you could see religion in all parts of history. In the most very small tribes are like in the middle of nowhere. They still have that same knowledge and almost same belief between other different unrelated different locations, and geography, the geography of their location didn't actually affect the formation of their religion. And I think our next topic for the next episode would be about sin. So it would be the belief.
Okay, the belief.
Yeah, so it would be about sin, where we'll probably have more disagreements than agreements. Even though I don't think we disagree that much on it, but Peter, he just likes to disagree on everything. Well, we'll see you in the next episode.
See you guys.